which peaked when the proposals came for a new name and a logo, and I think in a sense that while there was a general view from the grassroots that it was not a good idea, nevertheless it acted as a catalyst for those people who had wider dissatisfaction with the way the BMC was being run. And there was a motion of no confidence put to the AGM in 2017, which was substantially rejected, but nevertheless resulted in a great deal of debate and discussion BMC at all levels. Separately, Sport England published its Code for Sports Governance in October 2016 and told all the organisations that got funding from them that they had 2 years to comply. In 2017, in response, I think, to these two different directions of pressure, one from above and one from below perhaps, the BMC set up a working group on governance, the famous organisational review group, which was formed in April 2017, and its report was published in November, and a huge amount of work went into that during 2017. In 2018, the ORG amended its report and published an amended report on the 2nd of March, and an implementation group was set up in February and March, its terms of reference agreed, which was chaired by Andy, who we're going to hear from soon. The result of the implementation group was to take the broad proposals and principles put forward by the ORG and to produce a new set of articles for the BMC, for the company which is the BMC, which in April was reviewed by the National Council and recommended to the members, and it was agreed to hold an annual meeting a bit later than usual to accommodate all this in June. And along with that, it was agreed that this evening's forum should take place to give members a chance for a further input into the process at this late stage. During this time, I have to say, looking at it from the outside, there have been considerable opportunities. There's been a lot of consultation. There's been considerable opportunities for people to comment, and in last year there was quite a substantial member survey took place of 5,000 people who took part in it to put forward at least the views of those 5,000 people, which, having looked at it, my first reaction was, well, yes, I can't see anything here which I wouldn't have expected, really. A huge amount of work has taken place in a very short space of time, and I think the BMC owes a huge debt of gratitude to everybody who's made that possible and done it. So where are we now? We're at the implementation phase. It is suggested there should be 2 phases, if that's the word, or 2 new periods or whatever. One to take place this year with the new memorandum and articles of association, which it is proposed should be agreed at the annual meeting in June. And then phase 2, those recommendations which are not actually required in the new articles of association by Sport England are to be further considered by processes which I'm not sure that have been fully sorted out yet. The annual meeting on the 16th of June has 2 motions tabled to amend the Constitution. Proposal A, the National Council proposal, which is the proposal that originally came from the ORG, aimed at Tier 3 compliance with Sport England in the jargon, and Proposal B, from a group of members which would provide Tier 1 compliance with Sport England. And as I said before, following this meeting and other discussions which have been taking place, any changes will be considered by the National Council by some magic means tomorrow. The implementation group has been chaired by Andy Syme on my right. I'm going to assume that nobody in this room knows each other, which I suspect is totally untrue, but there may be one or two, and in any case there may be people watching from outside who genuinely don't know who people are, so I'm going to assume that that is the case. Andy Syme, and the leading person behind option B, Jonathan White, who is on my further right. And as I said, discussions have been taking place, some of which I've actually overheard when there were meant to be conference calls about this meeting. But they couldn't avoid getting into further discussions while I was listening, so there we are. And today, we have this little meeting. So, the order of business and house rules. We prepared question sheets in case there were hordes turning up. Hordes haven't turned up, so we'll abandon the question sheets. We're going to have, assuming it lasts that long, 2 hour-long sessions separated by a comfort break halfway through of 5 to 10 minutes. Anybody who wants to ask a question or make any comment, I'll ask you to start by saying who you are, clearly please, and then I wrote down be as brief as you can in case there were 200 people here, but we will take it sensibly. And John here is taking minutes, and there's going to be a...
Can you all sign a register, because you all hate having your names spelled incorrectly?
A register, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have other experts on hand. We have Dave on my left, Dave Turnbull, who is on this platform really to provide any factual information about the process that has taken place, in case anybody wants to ask. And we have Craig Jones, of course, yes. How could I forget? Who is here to, not sure what he's here for, to be Welsh, I think, but to take part in anything, any of the discussion that takes place. We're starting with 2 5-minute presentations from the 2 proposers at the annual meeting who put the motions down. And I'm going, even if you know all this already, I'm going to go through it for the benefit of Chris Bonington and anybody else who is watching in. Andy Syme, who is chair of the implementation group, spent 21 years in the army as an engineer on aircraft, which is interesting, and an IT specialist, then 10 years working in the NHS, now runs an IT company providing software to GPs. So when you go to your doctor and it doesn't work, you know who to blame. And has spent his life hill walking with his family, climbing with the Scouts, we've all been there, mountaineering, leading expeditions to Greenland and the Himalayas. And he says he's a passionate ice climber. I think anybody who goes ice climbing has to be passionate about it. And he's a very average rock climber, to which I say join the club. And a BMC member since the late 1980s, currently now Yorkshire Area Chair and rep on the National Council. And Jonathan White, who is a chartered civil engineer. I don't know if that's about banging bolts in and things like that or what. Started in Jordan's hill walking on Dartmoor, then went on to snow, British mountains and the Alps, has been on expeditions to Argentina, Greenland, Arctic, Norway, Morocco and Iran, and got out again. BMC member since 1991, member of various review panels and committees, and was chair of training. So they're all people with climbing, and they're both people with climbing, and the BMC firmly embedded in their DNA. So, let's start off.
Me first, I think.
Whoever wants to go first. Cheers.
I'm not necessarily used to using mics. Being in the army for years, you stand up at the front and shout, so if I start shouting, sort of tell me. So, first of all, it's nice to put faces to names. I've talked to an awful lot of you. Embarrassingly, I didn't recognise Les because I've never seen him before, so it wasn't until he said something I knew who he was. Luckily, it was his name, which helped. In terms of what we're trying to do tonight, really, to carry on the conversation that we've been having with a number of people, some of it through telephone, some of it through UKC, various other bits and pieces. I was going to sort of go through what the articles were, etc. Looking around, everyone pretty well read them, I think. There's not many people here who haven't had a good look at them already, having talked to other people as well. So I'll just go through fairly briefly about where their genesis was and how we came up with them. So I guess the first point is IG was not a little piece of work done in 2 weeks and that was it, or 2 months. It was a culmination of a large piece of work that started with the National Council before I was even involved with it, was implemented through the org and all the work that people did on the org there, and then was taken by the National Council, and there was a new requirement added that they wanted to maintain Tier 3. So we really were taking the work from the org, and we were also trying to maintain Tier 3. It was a clear requirement in the IG, and that's what we've tried to do from the start. And I do say it in that order for a reason. Get the org right and maintain Tier 3, not get Tier 3 and do it the other way round. And the way we've done the articles with Emma was we started from writing the articles as to what we wanted it to be, where we thought it was good governance, what was the right thing to do. And then we went to Sport England to overlay what was necessary from their side, have some fruity discussions with them about how we get to where we want to be. The second point is, all the members of the IG are members of the BMC. Most of us were on the National Council. I represent my area as a chair, I represent my area on the National Council. There was never an intent of the IG to sort of reduce member focus or to get rid of the member-centric focus of the BMC. It was very clear we were all trying to do the same thing. That possibly got lost a bit, partly through timing. Sport England, we've been working with Sport England, and they have required some stuff to fit with their code of compliance, or their code of governance compliance. I will say that actually, after an initial interesting start, they've worked really hard with us to try and find solutions, try and find ways to meet their code and for us to meet our requirements as well. I mean, it's not just been a fighting a wall there. Sometimes it's been challenging. We've gone back to them about things. But it's been negotiation, much in the same way that we're having a negotiation now. We've had a negotiation now. The biggest issue for me was we went to areas with a set of articles that were approved by Sport England at the start of their process when they were in what I would call the positioning phase of negotiations. They were putting everything right up at the top end of the red lines. It wouldn't be the articles I'd wanted to have shared if we could have been further on. We'd hoped to get through quicker with Sport England and get to a sort of next stage on. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for timelines and various other reasons. But I think it was unfortunate it was then, and it slightly put Sport England in a view that isn't necessarily fair to them. I'm not saying they're great, and I'm not saying they're not difficult at times, but possibly not as bad as some people have made them out to be. I think at the end of the day, what you've got is a small delta between what I would have wanted and other members of the IG would have wanted and Emma would have recommended as just good governance with nothing else, and what we needed to do to step over the line for Sport England. So at the end of the day, that delta I think is quite small. Some people may think is small but too big. I don't know. It's for the members to decide, but it is, the majority of what's in there is around the org and what's good governance, and there's a bit on top, a small amount on top. I guess finally, there's been some fraught exchanges and emotive reactions, but actually the majority of my time engaging with various people from the tier 1 proposers, etc. It's been positive. They've got clear views. They want to achieve what's better for the BMC, exactly the same way as the IG do. And we've sort of been working through it. And in the last couple of months, I think we've achieved an awful lot, and we just need to build on that, particularly for doing the rest of the org proposal stuff, which I think we're all agreed is the way forward.
There you go. How long is that? About 5.
Thank you. So the Tier 1 proposal, it's tabled for many reasons. Firstly, to raise awareness of the decisions that need to be made. Also, to demonstrate that there are alternatives to the way forward that is proposed under Tier 3. It was to keep the debate alive at least until tonight, and that was one of the very key points that we wanted to make sure was that there was the opportunity for people to discuss. We tried to get this forum in before the 45-day deadline for proposals. It just wasn't possible. Everything has been done under great pressure, so this was done for that reason. It was also to offer those who were concerned about the Tier 3 proposals something more constructive to consider than just a no vote, because I think many of us feel that just saying no to something doesn't actually get us forward, and most of us agree that the BMC does need to move forward. It was in order to give clarity to what were the Companies Act requirements and what were the Sport England requirements, and I think that was quite difficult for a number of us to extract what was coming from where. It was also to give well, really a compromise here, and this is something Andy Say's asked me to raise this evening, is that the Tier 1 proposal is a compromise from some of the positions that people had taken previously. The proposers are an ad hoc group. Of the 44, 21 of them I've never met. I've met a couple this evening. 8 I haven't met for a decade, and the rest I've not necessarily got a great deal of regular contact with, but they do include 2 current national councillors and 5 former area reps. 2 recent BMC directors, 3 former specialist committee chairs, and 1 patron. What we have in common is that we care deeply about the BMC. We know that the BMC isn't perfect, but we think that there's an awful lot that is very good about the BMC, and we want to keep that. And we believe the BMC fundamentally should remain a democratic, member-led organisation. The Tier 1 proposal is simple. Again, hopefully I won't go into the details of it. Hopefully you've read it or can take the time to read it. It uses the existing articles as the basis, so you only need to look at the things that have changed, and it incorporates our understanding of the Warmble-Bond-Dickinson advice on the strict Companies Act compliance. Taking that approach minimises the risk of errors, omissions and unintended consequences compared to starting with a different set of articles that we're not familiar with, and it also gives, to echo the point here, a solid starting point for the Phase 2 works and developing the ORG recommendations, most of which we wholeheartedly endorse. And I think most of those that we have some concerns over can probably be worked through as well, but I think 40 of the 51 I can put a tick next to straight away. The Tier 3 proposal did come through under phenomenal time pressures. Many of us felt that it was really rushed, and there was something like 7 or 8 weeks between the ORG final report and the submission deadline for the AGM. So it was a very, very tight period of time. And given that these are potentially the biggest changes in a generation for the BMC, some of us felt this was too rushed. In the April area meetings, they took place over the course of 10 days. The things were changing by the day, without doubt, and different area meetings saw different proposals, so we weren't all discussing the same thing. But actually some really good stuff started to come through those. And since then, there was a National Council meeting at the end of April, and actually there were quite a lot of changes were made at that National Council meeting compared to what had gone out to the area meetings, and from my perspective I think they were all positive. So that was a really positive step forward, and since then, in the 2 weeks or so since, we have had a further significant progress, significant dialogue. Andy and I are in discussion, I think, in contact one way or another, basically every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Others are as well, and we have fundamentally been confirming the intent of the changes and whether the wording meets that intent. And actually we've made phenomenal progress, including 3 hours this afternoon where we've gone through 4 points and 1 clarification. So it's been a major piece of work done in a very short period of time. where do we differ then? Because there's a danger of a big loving up here at the moment. Where do we differ? Well, the Tier 1 articles start from a familiar point and the Tier 3 are new. On Sport England funding, the Tier 1 proposers generally think that the level of funding that's likely to be available is not significant for the BMC at the moment. 8 to 10% of our income is not life-changing and it's dealable with by subs increases, but the Tier 3 think it's significant. Disagree with me if you like. For the funding partners, the Tier 1 proposal would need the funded partners to go directly to Sport England for funding, as I believe they are at the moment. Whereas if Tier 3 is adopted, they can continue to go via the BMC as one unified proposal. In terms of the structure of the BMC, what we have as an organisation, and this afternoon's discussions really typify that. I think the Tier 1 people feel that the BMC's structure, the decisions on that should be member-led, whereas for Tier 3, there is a very, very heavy level of determination of what is acceptable to Sport England, whether we like it or not. And ultimately, National Council, Tier 1 is very keen for National Council to retain some authority. It has to have enough of a purpose to make people want to be part of it, to know that they're making a difference. Whereas the Tier 3 proposal does move almost all of the authority to the directors. And to close, I think our position really has been throughout that our preference was that we voluntarily withdraw from Sport England funding until the next AGM to provide breathing space and to enable us to agree a package of changes which are right for the BMC without feeling that we're being pushed into things by funding considerations.
Thank you very much, both of you. Right, I think we can just go straight to questions. Or fairly short comments. We had thought that we might try and divide the meeting into a first period when we were talking about very specific technical things that the discussions about the articles have been concerned with, and then perhaps have a discussion about the wider issues of principle or philosophy or even ideology, whether it's a top-down or bottom-up organisation, where its funding comes from, the extent to which it should be involved in the increasing commercial areas of climbing, from climbing competitions, and the fact it's going to be an Olympic sport. But that was on the basis that we might have rather more people here who were all upset about some of these things. What I'm going to do is to ask, are there people here who are fundamentally opposed to the whole proposal of the Sport England based Tier 3 changes to the Constitution, as opposed to where Jonathan and Andy have now got, which is to negotiate a reasonable compromise? I think that's a fair thing. Does anybody here want to challenge the whole basis of everything? No. You sure? This is
In the
turning
back
out.
of a question, is it worth us talking about some of the
I think it
work
is.
we've done? That'll probably start some conversations off, I would have thought.
I think it would help if people on the panel could actually talk about some of these fundamental things, because they are fundamental to the future of the BMC. And while it's clear that the existing changes are being forced from above, I mean, people might think that they're necessary and desirable anyway, but the reason they are happening now is because Sport England are demanding that they happen. It's as simple as that, in return for the funding and in return for the BMC continuing to be the recognised national governing body for mountaineering in all its forms. I think that's fair, isn't it?
Yeah, within reason.
Within
there are some variations on that. Yes,
Yes,
we'll
okay,
accept
okay.
that as a good start.
Okay. Now, putting that on one side. Yeah. Okay. You can come in a minute.
Now, for the
Just
people
wait.
online,
Yeah. Just wait. No. Hang on a minute. Let me just say. Now, if we're accepting that or not, then it is still something which is going to affect the whole ethos and organisation of the BMC in the future if people let it affect it. So that's the basic issue to talk about. Right, can you say who you are and then what you want to say?
Okay, yeah. I'm Pete Sterling. So the thing I want to pick up on is the comment you just made about, which had an assertion in it, which I think a lot of people are either not informed enough to understand what it means, or it's just wrong.
Right.
And that is that to be the national governing body, we need to be any tier. The tiering, as Sport England might agree, is utterly irrelevant to national governing body. We are a national governing body. That's just a fact. You know, where else is there one? There isn't one. It is the BMC. Therefore, you know, we must. I think it'd be useful really just take that off the table and not have it as part of the debate, because tier 1, tier 3, tier 2, that it's irrelevant in all scenarios. All scenarios, the BMC is still the national governing body.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry.
Would other people like to comment on that, on this general area? Gentleman at the back.
Mike Pinder. I'll take exception to that response, because the national governing body is, if it's a self-imposed title, anybody can call themselves that. If it's a designated title by central authority, it's whoever they recognise. Any organisation could set themselves up as the national governing body of climbing, mountaineering, if the BMC rejects that position, or the Sport England choose to recognise somebody else. I mean, this is absolutely and utterly not a threat, but with the situation, if the BMC were to opt for Tier 1, and Mountain Training England, of which I'm Vice Chair at the moment, continued to have dealings with Sport England, I can foresee a situation where Mountain Training England could claim to be the representative body of mountaineering in the UK, certainly of mountaineering instructors and award holders and leaders and whatever else you want to call them. And I really suspect that Sport England might be rather open to the idea of a group who actually issue certificates of competence to instruct at a sport being the national governing body. So I think that if the BMC might choose to call itself anything it likes, but if a central funding organisation chooses to call another organisation and recognise another organisation as a national body for it, they can do the same. And I know, the likelihood is that the one that's getting the funding is the one that's going to be taken more seriously.
Right, yes, sir.
John Roberts, I was on the organisation review group. So I've got a quote from Sport England's head of partnerships that was sent in an email and has been quoted in the IG docs as well. It says, the amount of funding is one factor, but certainly not the deciding factor. All of the national governing bodies, which includes the BMC, who have previously been funded and who we continue to fund, have been assessed as Tier 3 of the code, regardless of their size or level of investment. So is Tier 1 a moot point, or is it a point of not wanting to go for investment in future at all? Because the BMC has been assessed to be a Tier 3 body.
We go back to those words you used there, that continue to receive funding. Yeah, so in the short term, we were very clear we would have to withdraw from Sport England funding. Not necessarily in the long term. We might go back to that position, but the key was to try and remove the Sport England funding question from the equation, decide on what is right for the BMC, still go for Tier 1 recognition so that we are recognised by Sport England, and according to Sport England's own documentation, you can still receive limited funding under, according to their documentation, their Code for Sport Governance, you can. There evidently has been other correspondence which then disagrees with their Code for Sport Governance. But in the meantime, our feeling was if we put £3 ahead on the subs, we cover it anyway. That's the kind of level we're talking about. in which case we can then make our own decisions. And in a year's time, if we decide it's right to go for funding, then we could do that.
The code also says that it's Sport England's prerogative. I think it's 1.14, as to which tier they decide anybody to be in to be funded. And therefore, it's an assumption. It is in their documentation, but it's an assumption that you can be funded as a tier 1 body at the moment, and it's a false assumption as far as Sport England's communication is concerned.
Martin.
Hi, Martin Ragg, Honorary Solicitor. We're focusing on Sport England funding. Although I think that it has some significance, I don't think it is of overriding importance. What is of overriding importance is good governance. And we've spent several years debating at National Council and the board, the executive, about who makes which decisions, who is responsible for what. And that lack of clarity has confused decision making, contributed to some mistakes, and generally been unhelpful. And it is now apparent and widely known that our articles currently are not compliant with the Companies Act, and they need to be. And irrespective of whether we go to tier 1 or tier 3, the way in which we become compliant is by giving control of the management of the organisation to the board of directors. And that's what the National Council articles achieve. But they also address some of the Sport England needs. But the fundamental issue is compliance with the Act.
Can I just...
sorry. There's some reason.
Moody from One Wood Wonderful. I just want to reiterate exactly what Martin said. For me, it was always about good governance and compliance with the law, not necessarily the Companies Act, but compliance with the law generally. I want to reiterate what Andy said at the start about the debate that has gone on with Sport England. So we did not take the code as read as the legal Bible by which we needed to then draft the articles. We pushed and we pushed on some very fundamental points in the interests of the members, and Sport England did concede on those points. There were areas where they wouldn't necessarily concede, but we had the robust debate. So I do think it's important for people to remember that we haven't just jumped through hoops to meet their tune.
Can I apologise for making what sounded like an assertion earlier on? I'm not supposed to make assertions. It was a statement with a question mark at the end. So if I make any more assertions, they've all got question marks at the end. How far, I mean, would people like to make an assessment? How far have the proposals in what's being put forward in the National Council proposals, perhaps with one or two changes which have now being proposed, how far have they gone along the spectrum from the BMC being a democratic member-based organisation to being a centralised, top-down controlled organisation? I mean, what are the compromises or the moves which have taken place, and how significant are they? So I think that's what an ordinary member like me really wants to know when we read all this huge, massive stuff which has come out.
I guess the first point is, again, your assertion question towards a top-down, centralised Stalinist state is not really where I think we're anywhere close to.
But there are people saying it is.
There are people who are seeing it that way. So I think the articles that went out to the area were clearly much more focused on Sport England's requirements. They were also focused on our understanding of some of the article of their code, which, with a bit more clarity and a bit more conversation, we were able to improve and get better. I think you've now got a board that is between a minimum of 7, maximum of 12 BMC members on the board. So, you know, it is board-led. We've been talking today about the member elected and how many should be elected and appointed. So currently, with the articles, you've got one person who is completely elected, that's the president. You've got National Council, who are obviously elected through the areas, and then three of them. You've got the CEO, who's appointed. You've then got the chair. The chair is appointed on skills and then is appointed to the board, but subject to approval by the National Council at the AGM. And the same applies to the independent directors and could apply to nominated directors, because there are two different ways you can get a nominated director. One is you say, I want somebody who looks like this, and you go out to the membership and say to the whole membership, we're looking for people to volunteer who look like this. Or the alternative is to say, from a board's perspective, we need skills or representation from a particular group, a particular area. So if you look at, say, cycling, they have representation from athletes. So in the future, we might say it's important to have board representation from athletes. So you go out to a specific group to say, we want somebody from your group to come and represent you on the board. Those are the two ways. And they're appointed. The others are elected. One of the things that we've talked about today and that I need to talk to the National Council about is actually, at the moment we're saying when a stakeholder group appoints somebody, then they just get put on, and we're actually opening it up to say that the stakeholder group can put forward a number of candidates, as opposed to just saying, here's Shauna, you know, Shauna will be the athlete representative. Actually say, here are 2 or 3 candidates that you can put up, and then those candidates could go for an election at the AGM, as opposed to just they put up one, which allows to move towards one of the issues that I think the Tier 1 had, which was about the number of elected people on the board. So that moves it from being 4 to 7. So you're back up to, you know, more than half.
Hold on a minute, we have...
John's got to run. At the back, it's Mike.
Right.
Sorry.
And then we've got a couple of people from the Great Outdoors who want to say something.
It was just a specific question. You talked about a board member, a director being subject to a vote at the AGM. Do you mean the AGM, or do you mean the National Council inflicting that vote on the person? Is it an open one for all members of the AGM, or is it for the National Council to vote on the person?
All the appointments or approvals are at the general meeting for all members. So the only one...
You actually said it's for the National Council to decide at the AGM.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
So, no.
You know how picky I am.
No. It goes to the AGM and the members vote.
Okay.
Can I just...
We'll take you next.
Yes, good evening. My name is Rod Gallagher. If I could help clarify the position that Andy was trying to set out, I think we can do this by simply asking 2 simple questions. How many directors on the board under the Tier 3 proposal will have been elected by members at an AGM? That's question 1. And secondly, under the current status quo articles, how many of our directors are elected by the members at the AGM at the moment?
You want us to do maths? Should we come back on that one?
Yeah. Well, Rob wants to make a point, I think, is the whole thing here, which is, I'm not sure of the current articles, but you've got 3 national councils, all except 3, so 9, is it? 9 of the current articles? Where's Martin?
All except 6.
All except 6. Who's doing the maths here?
So,
we think it's 6 is what we're coming up with in the current articles. I'm looking desperately at Martin.
That's good for 100%. Go on.
That's 50%, isn't it? 50% of the 12. Oh yeah, okay. And under the new, under the current articles as written, the only guaranteed elected person is the president, but all the others go for approval by the membership. If we do the change that we, the only guarantee is the president, then you've got 3 nominated directors, depending on whether they come from an appointment or elected, they'll be up to 4. That's where you are.
No, with the greatest respect, the question was how many other directors have been elected by the members at the AGM?
4. Up to 4.
No, it's not. It's not. It's 1. It's the president.
Yes, but as I said, the nominated directors can either be appointed by a subgroup or elected from the membership. So you've got 1 guaranteed, as I said, and then you've got up to 4 who are, so 3 more, the 3 nominated directors could all go through the AGM, and you have the 3 National Council as well.
The key here to get to that point of majority elected is to have is to sort out the selection process for the nominated directors. So we need the clarity of the process, but we also need to get to a point where we actually do have multiple people who are willing and able and of the right fit to stand for roles. Because there are provisions in the articles to have an election if more than 1 person fits the criteria, but it does require more than 1 person who fits the criteria to stand.
Yeah, hello. Rick Payne, I'm Chair of London South East Area. I just want to come back on a point that Rod Gallagher made, and that's we have to accept that moving forward, looking at good governance, we have to ensure that the board of directors have the skills that are necessary to govern efficiently. And in doing that, we have to give way partly to having people elected directly by the members to having a more scrutinised system so we can actually choose the best people to appoint to our board of governors. Now that might be that people end up being nominated by a different group, it might be that people are nominated through a national council by people who are elected by the membership. But actually to suggest that the best way to elect people to the board of governors is directly by the membership is not actually true. We have to recognise that we have to move forward and have a better system of making sure the best people are on our board of directors.
Is this thing working?
are extremely different. So it is a challenge, and we just need to, if we want to be the umbrella body that the ORG wants us to be, and to cover all of the different aspects of the sport and all of the different organisations within the sport, then it's something we need to do.
I'm going to call a break for whatever people want to break for in a minute. I just want to add one thing with a question mark at the end to this question. I'm not sure the question is the fundamental one. I think the fundamental question isn't people pulling on plastic holes inside and whatever. It's the question of commercial competition climbing, that if the BMC in the future wants to be the umbrella for that as well as everything else, I think that's the fundamental question that's going to have to be faced up to, because there are going to be huge commercial pressures out there if competition climbing really takes off, which it might well do as a result of the Olympics. So I just leave that as a floating, really. But we're going to break for until 25 past, if that's okay, and then we'll come back and we'll take you first.
Okay. You might regret that.
That's all right.
Keep your fingers at rest. Yeah. No. I'm usually right on the horse.
Roughly.
Right. Where were you?
You get out, right? So it's all beautiful. Yeah.
It's good because it proves that works.
You're a volunteer for that, right?
Okay, let's get going again, please. We'll keep going until we run out of things people want to say. We'll have a check at 9 o'clock, and then if people are still really keen, we'll keep going till 9:30, which is what we said originally. But if everybody starts walking out, then we'll not sit here. No. And I've just been told, I've just had a message from my daughter who said, I've been watching you on YouTube. So there you are. So the system works anyhow, although I don't think she's got any questions to send in yet. Right, you were next.
John Booth. As a question really for the Tier 3 and Tier 1, we've established that we're all volunteers. I think everybody in the room has volunteered for the BMC in the past, looking at the name sheet that went round. And with that aspect of being a volunteer and being unpaid, there is an aspect of the civil liability cover and being insured, which there is a key difference from the Tier 3 articles and the existing articles in that level of cover to us as volunteers of this organisation.
Just get Richard to answer yes.
Yeah, this is the indemnification.
Could you take it straight to Richard? He's answered this perfully earlier on in the evening to Jonathan and I. So,
yeah, I've been sitting here quietly hoping I wouldn't get a question. Richard Doubleday, I'm from Howden, who you are insurance brokers. Effectively, the old articles or the current articles of association, in my view, are uninsurable. It's as simple as that. There are certain things that you cannot insure, and whatever the articles of association say, an insurance policy wording cannot follow it. So you have directors and officers protection. It covers directors, committee members, trustees, all volunteers in respect of their executive responsibilities. But it stops somewhere, and it stops if you commit a criminal act, and it also stops if you have to pay a punitive fine. We can't ensure that. It's impossible to do. The new Articles of Association are more or less bang on in line with what an insurance policy would provide indemnity for.
Okay. As a question for, if we've got a volunteer fixing bolts, and for whatever reason, an aspect of civil liability without intent, he or she is sued. Is he or she covered?
Right, we're talking about two different things, okay? We're here this evening talking about governance, okay? And the governance of the BMC and the committees and indeed the clubs and so on is covered by a directors and officers policy. If you, if you are leading a group, if you are putting bolts in, if you're organising a route or whatever, and a negligence claim is made against you, you are covered full stop. Whether it's the old articles or the current articles or the new Articles Association, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever.
Okay, if we're talking about bolts, Jonathan's a civil engineer.
That's far more mechanical engineering as far as I'm concerned. No, I think there is a fundamental difference between the two articles. The old articles under clause 67, Article 67, say that subject to the provisions of the Act, blah, 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 every councillor, every officer and every employee of the BMC shall be indemnified against costs, charges, losses, expenses, liabilities incurred by him in the execution of his and discharge of his responsibilities relating to the BMC. I think most of us will acknowledge that was an overreaching indemnification. The point about that indemnification is we're indemnified currently by, as a minimum, the assets of the BMC. So that's the money in the bank, Burton Road value, etc., etc. So if somebody under those criteria is operating on behalf of the BMC, if anything goes wrong, if they are sued, and we can only, as Richard says, you can only be covered for civil claims. It is an offence in its own right to try to pay somebody else's criminal fine, so we couldn't do that anyway. But that indemnity basically is a blanket coverage to all those people, regardless of the circumstances. And I think we all agree that actually there would be certain circumstances, such as malicious behaviour, such as stepping outside the rules of the organisation, where actually people shouldn't be covered. So a departure from that is not controversial. It's probably good governance to protect the assets of the organisation from people who might go off on a frolic of their own, to use the phrase. So a move from that is not necessarily disputed. The question is whether the new Article 32 covers that, because the new Article 32 only provides for a fund for you to defend yourself, and if you are not acquitted of that, then you have to repay it. So that's not a lot of defence for members out of the assets of the BMC. However, because basically, if you are acquitted of a similar civil offence, A, you don't have to pay a fine, and B, you should get your costs incurred. So it's a sort of non-protection, if you like, because it's only protecting you against the things that you don't need protection from anyway, but it does give you a fighting fund. So, yeah, we were pretty uncomfortable with that shift. However, having spoken to Richard on Friday and again today, we are now comfortable that even though the indemnity from the assets of the organisation are significantly reduced, actually the insurance cover is extremely good, and only if you are malicious or criminal are you not covered, and rightly so.
There are two distinct things. One is the Articles of Association, and those are the rules by which, assuming they're agreed, those are the rules by which the BMC is governed. There is then a separate contract of insurance, which in this case, covering the governance, is the Directors and Officers Policy. That is an entirely separate contract.
Okay, have we done indemnification and such like?
Can I just give one quick clarity on that, because I know something that came up as a discussion probably between Paul and I on UK climbing a couple of months ago was how far the Directors and Officers insurance extends. It does extend to people involved at all levels. And again, could you give us that list again, Richard, of so basically the concerns over people acting as shadow directors we don't need to be worried about because we already have cover for people who are statutory directors and are in other positions of authority, so national councillors don't need to worry.
Yeah, so it would cover any natural person. I don't know what an unnatural person is, I'm afraid, but it's any natural person who was, is, or during the period of insurance becomes a partner, member, trustee, committee member, director or officer of you. So effectively it's a catch-all. It's designed to provide protection to everybody in respect of their executive responsibilities. This is the D&O section, and then the civil liability section provides indemnity to the 85,000 members in relation to their lawful mountaineering activities that follow BMC guideline, not rules and regulations, but BMC guidelines.
I think a non-natural person is a company or whatever. So the BMC is a non-natural person.
I'll answer his first. I think he's more important, so I'll go first.
Right, back here. Yeah.
Sorry, pass it to Les.
I was just asking if it included the paid staff.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes, yeah.
Hello, yes, I'm Carl Spencer, North West Area Chair and member of National Council and one of the supporters of the alternative Tier 1 proposal. I think it's a fair summary to say that the reason we're here today is because there is a big difference between Tier 1 and Tier 3. And it worries me that as a National Council member, there's been no mention of Tier 1, Tier 3, or even Tier 2 in any of the documentation up until the 2nd of March. It's not been debated at National Council at any great depth, and it's not been debated at the area at any great depth. And bearing in mind that the key message that came out of the survey in December, I think it was, the members' survey, was that we should slow down. My question is to the organisational review team, at what point did they think that Tier 3 was a mandatory requirement? That's question one. And question two is, do we really need to steam forward to work to a deadline of August this year? Would it not be better to slow down and pause and rethink?
The only person from the...
Hang on. Is it the same topic?
Insurance.
No, okay, I'll come back to you. Yeah, can you answer this one?
Well, you asked that of the org. It's for the org. Well, the only person here who's from the org, unfortunately, is you, John. Are you able to answer that? Because that's obviously specifically about the org review.
Yeah, so we understood that Sport England required the BMC to be at Tier 3 as an organisation. If it was to... we didn't have that specific bit of writing, which I spoke before, which, to repeat, was the amount of funding is one factor, but certainly not the deciding factor. All the national governing bodies who we've previously funded and who we continue to fund have been assessed as Tier 3 of the code, regardless of their size or level of investment. So we understood that to be the case, that we needed to meet Tier 3 whilst drafting the recommendations, and that was the code that were to be assessed against. Between November and March, it became apparent that there were a number of concerns about whether it was Tier 3 or Tier 1, and you'll note that Tier 3 was addressed in the foreword and in the introduction of the amendments report and the clarifications on the 2nd of March.
Have we anything else on this broad issue of Tier 3, Tier 1?
Well, I guess the second part of that question was, we've not had that debate. Sorry. I agree that the second iteration of the organisational review, which came out on the 2nd of March, did cover the need for Tier 3, but that was after the organisational review, the implementation group had already commenced work. It deeply worries me as a National Council member that we've not had that debate at National Council, we've not had that debate at area meetings, and we're committing to the organisation to something we don't fully understand. And not only that, we're rushing into it. So I guess the second part to the question is, do we really want to rush into this for a deadline that we're not really aware of, we've not seen in writing, we're taking on face value from certain people, word of mouth? Is that something we really want to do for 8 to 10% of our revenue?
When was National Council told that the governance of BMC wasn't up to scratch?
No, that's a different issue.
No,
it's a different issue.
2 years ago. So National Council haven't been acting.
So that's a different issue, that.
I think.
Can we not have any heckling? You can come back if you wish.
I mean, you say that it's not been discussed at National Council. I would say it has been discussed at National Council. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4. So a number of 5 national councillors here, all but 6, including me, believe it was discussed, Carl. So, I mean...
I think you'll find, if you look back through the minutes, the word tier 1, 2 or 3 does not appear until March.
Right.
By which time you'd already commenced your work.
Right,
Go on. Pete, do you want to go first? And then... I mean, I was just going to say, as it walks over, certainly in terms of areas, we've discussed it quite a lot at Yorkshire, and so, I mean, there are areas that it has been discussed. It may not have been discussed in the North East, I don't know, I didn't attend. Northwest even, sorry, Carl.
So I just want to, it's Pete Sterling again here for anybody listening in the glorious internet. I just wanted to say, you know, we've been having a good debate in the last 45 minutes, which has really got down to some of the issues that we've actually started to resolve. And we've just now, in the last 5 minutes, drifted back into a tier 1 versus tier 3 emotive thing, which I'd like to make a point really. It's kind of irrelevant, because the real issue that differentiates these two things is about member representation. That's the real nub of it. It is not the money, the tiers, or any of that stuff, and national governing bodies and so forth. The real issue is about member representation and how that manifests itself. The terms of reference, which I drafted for the ORG, talked about the BMC is for its members, run by its members. That is really what this organisation is about. So the whole tier 1, tier 3 governance stuff is, in my view, a complete red herring, because it is a side effect of the words that you put into the articles around who's running the organisation. Are the members running it or the board running it? And that, the side effect of answering that question is what tier you fall down to. Rodney's agreeing with me. So that is the real issue. The real issue is about who is running the company, the organisation, and the side effect. And you just need to leave that aside, I think, because it's not productive in terms of where we're getting to. What is productive, my final point, is which tries to address this specific problem, which I think is at the core of the whole debate. It's why National Council 18 months, 24 months ago started beating itself up about, you know, who's actually pulling the strings here. And the core resolution to that, which hasn't been discussed yet, and I think we need to get onto, is this memorandum of understanding. Because that is the mechanism that I think puts to bed, takes Sport England out of the equation, how National Council exercises some influence over which direction this organisation goes in. You know, it's very easy to read the Tier 3 articles and think, crikey, this horse could go off down the road and we wouldn't know, the members wouldn't know what's happening. That could happen. It could happen. Would it happen? I don't know, but it could happen. So the Memorandum of Understanding is about putting in place a mechanism whereby the parties are obliged to each other, and I use the word obliged meaningfully, to behave in a certain way and not run off down the road with the horse. And that is the real crux of this whole debate. Who's in charge and have the members got a say? The tiering stuff is a side effect of that.
Can I just... No, keep the microphone because I want to ask you a question. Because I think this is fundamental to some of the opposition to what is being proposed. Looking at it from outside, as I do, it does appear that the reason that the change in relationship between the board and the members is being put forward is precisely because that is required in order to get Tier 3 status with Sport England. You're denying that.
No, I'm not denying it. I'm absolutely accepting that point. It is because of the I don't want to use the word rules, but I can't think of another one off the top of my head that Sport England are giving us. But we were going into there. Carl's got a very passionate point of view of a debate versus, when did Tier 3 crop up in the debate? It's not really the point I'm trying to make is that is not really the issue. The issue is how do members have a say? And given that we've got some rules, we've got a box to operate within, and one side of that box is Sport England. Therefore, we'll do that to make lots of people happy. But the crucial mechanism that addresses the real issue, I think, that's open to us is this memorandum.
And you think it is solvable through that?
I think so. I mean, it's a mechanism that allows us to have a say, a meaningful say, in which direction this organisation goes in.
Right, thank you. Are we on the same subject? Yeah, right. Well, we'll go there, and then Emma.
Hello, hi. Lyndon Gill. I'm a former National Council member and a former member of the Executive. Been on a couple of committees, not involved for the past few years, so I've been watching this from the outside, really. And I'd like to welcome Nick Hurst's comments about giving the members choice in who governs us. I think that would be a major change for the organisation going forward. And to be frank, the membership deserve that privilege, since even at our best forecasts, they fund the BMC to the tune of 90%. So they deserve a say in who governs them. And if I may, if we could just break down that governance into, you can break it into many parts, but if we break it down into two parts that I'd like us to consider, that's the issue of the executive functions, that of compliance, of our legal issues, and all the other special knowledge and experience that the executive members bring to the committee. And then if we take the second part of governance, which is about policy formation. And and those two are quite different things, and I think the people that perform those functions are two different kinds of people. One of them bring business experience and knowledge and their background, and the other people are representative persons who are prepared and willing to represent the will of the membership to the organisation, to the executive. And it seems to me that what Martin and Emma and Rick were suggesting about the different types of organisation that we plan to have. I think this is where the Tier 1, Tier 3 argument's coming in, and our compliance with a corporate structure. There's maybe people could be forgiven for thinking that Tier 1 is not compliant with the 2006 Corporation Act, when in fact it's a perfectly legitimate form of governance that Sport England recommends, and it therefore must be compliant with the 2006 Act. So the Tier 1 option, the only difference is that the Tier 3 option, the Sport England stipulates that members' councils are forbidden. And the primacy of primacy for policy must shift to the executive.
So it doesn't forbid members' councils. What the code says is that no more than a third of the directors on the board can be from the national councils. It doesn't prevent additional members being directors, which is what we've got in these articles.
It forbids members' councils from having primacy in decision making. So presently what we have is each member of the BMC is entitled to elect 2 representatives onto the National Council, which has direct primacy over policy. So the policies that we want to see nationally implemented by the BMC are both formulated in cooperation with the executive and with the membership, so that we get an efficient and a representative policy framework. And the National Council is also tasked with overseeing adherence to that policy structure. So the Tier 3 proposal, in terms of giving the Executive Committee primacy, removes the absolute primacy from the membership of policy formation. in an organisation that is funded to the tune of 90% by the membership. So what I'd like to see from Peter's memorandum of understanding between the executive and the National Council is some words that could reassure us that the membership still have a significant say in an organisation that they fund to the tune of 90%. And
Can I answer that question?
Yeah, yes, okay.
And if I could just ask one other question as well, because then I don't need to get the mic. So we also were considering the issues of what proportion of the board will be elected at AGM. And I wondered what assurances we might have, since the proposals that go to the board are the domain of the nominations committee, what assurances we might be given in the trust in the nominations committee to represent the membership in that interest, because as far as I can see the membership...
Can I just stop you there, because I think this is an important part of it.
Those are my two issues, so can we get down to this memorandum of understanding?
Yes, I'll come back to that.
And about the issues.
I want to pick up the nominations committee. I'll come back to the memorandum of understanding. Can I just ask you, is it your view that the memorandum of understanding, if it's right, can resolve a lot of the problems that you've raised about the balance between the board and the council?
In my own view, given my experience on the executive and dealing with the executive myself, that a memorandum cannot provide that assurance to the membership. Okay. That is my view of 6 years on National Council and 1 year on the Executive Committee, that the Executive need a fundamental clause in the Articles of Association which can be provided for under Tier 1 compliant governance Articles of Association. Yeah. It's only Tier 3 that requires committees to not have primacy on policy.
Yeah, no, I think we've understood that, but
so
it was said previously
we're giving up that primacy for that 8% of funding.
But I mean, it was accepted by some. Hold on, it was accepted by I've forgotten your name. Peter, that's right. Yes, it was accepted by Peter that the memorandum of understanding was fundamental. And you said it's fundamental, but there's a difference of view as to whether in practice it can resolve the thing. Okay, can I... Yeah, okay. Can I just come on to the question of the nomination committee, which, as I understand it, is one of the issues to be discussed in phase 2. Can anybody tell us what the thinking is about the nomination committee and how it will work?
I can. Can I just do one point on primacy first? It's not just Sport England, Lyndon. If you look at the Sport and Recreation Alliance, they say that the board must have primacy too. So it is the sort of accepted good governance now. So it's not just Sport England is the point there. In terms of nominations committee...
Can you confirm? I've looked at that many-page document from Sport England, and the only specific mention of membership councils being stipulated against is for Tier 3. They're not mentioned in Tier 1. And many organisations, Climb Scotland for instance, have membership councils. They're Tier 1 compliant. So let
him answer.
I'm not sure that Sport England, that Mountaineering Scotland are Tier 1, but I can't answer them whether they are or not. It's a Scottish code, it's different anyway, yeah, their code of governance may well be. That's not, no. The requirement around things like independent directors and primacy of the board is around good governance. Emma, you're just looking if you want to say something.
Yeah, but I don't want to jump in front of the other one. I would like to come back on the memorandum thing, because I think, can I say something?
Have you finished?
Yeah. Are you doing
Well, I'll come back to you on the nomination.
Sport England aren't saying that you can't have a national...
Emma, and then Peter.
Sport England aren't saying that you can't have a national council. It's pretty well accepted that you can. It's a representative group of the members, it's the voice of the members, and it's the intermediary forum that holds your directors to account. You know, it would be a very, very silly group of well-informed directors who would run off on a frolic of their own, insurance or not. You know, when you appoint a director based on skills and expertise, you train them up into what the law requires of them. And the members entrust those persons to run their BMC on their behalf, and if they don't, they hold them to account. And I think, you know, under the current articles, whether it's Tier 1 or Tier 3, I highlighted a risk that your current National Council, their decision-making authority and powers are such that in some instances they could be regarded as shadow directors. And we felt that the articles needed to be shifted back so that the board had legal responsibility and importantly, liability in the event that something went wrong. So a lot of the changes to the articles, I think, would have been made, whether it was Tier 1 or Tier 3, to get the position of the board as the body with legal responsibility, and who is then in turn held to account by National Council and by the members as a whole. And the reserved matters that we've specifically included in the articles in the Tier 3 compliant document or in the NC promoted version are specifically there to recognise the role of National Council in representing the members' views on matters of significant importance. And so when you think about, you know, what is ultimately the direction and future of the BMC, you know, National Council's voice is there to be listened to on behalf of the members. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, Peter.
First of all, I want to play to the audience. I've had a Facebook notification that says I am live. So people are watching. Keep watching, keep listening. So the Memorandum of Understanding, all I really wanted to say, Lyndon and others, in fact everybody, is this is a document that we don't have to have sorted out tonight. Indeed, for several weeks, I don't think. But it is a document that will deliver, I think, what you want, Lyndon, in that if we get, you know, I mean, I'll make a promise, basically. I mean, I won't necessarily promise to deliver all of it, but I do promise that everything that anybody submits by way of, we need to cover this, cover that, cover the other, I will champion it. And, you know, people in the room will know how continuously nagging I can be when I say I will champion something. Andy's laughing at the front, although he and I are going to have a fight later. So, I mean, I will promise to champion any points that you think that memorandum needs to have in it to deliver the voice that you want National Council and members to have. That document is our document. It is the membership's document. And should the board decide to go and build Reghead and spend all the BMC's money, so it happens, you know, the board does do bad stuff, Andy. So if that were to happen, there is the mechanism in the articles as they stand, that proposed at the moment, to say, holy crap, they are going off down the road with the horse. And that mechanism is that National Council can call a general meeting. So, you know, even without the authority to make decisions and policy and all that being written into the articles, we do have the authority to call a general meeting to review what is actually happening. And the mechanism by which we flag up, I think, that this general meeting needs to be called is that something in the memorandum of articles, an obligation in there, has been broken in some people's view. So if we get that memorandum properly structured, and I will promise to champion every suggestion that it should cover off, if that document is right, backed up by the fact that we can call a general meeting if we think it's been broken, I think that can deliver the voice that the membership and National Council want, which, bring back my point from earlier, you know, delivers the actual problem here, which is the voice of the members. Because, you know, Emma said the point, both proposals, A and B, have the board in the prime position in terms of making policy and so forth. That's kind of a given. But this memorandum really can deliver. If you all input to it what you want it to say, it can deliver the voice of the members.
Okay, Jonathan next. It's 9 o'clock. I judge that this will keep going a bit longer, so we'll keep going a bit longer. Jonathan.
Can I, because I'm going to come directly back on your points there, and two of the words you use, which are words that have come up a lot in our discussions over the last few weeks. And those words are primacy and policy. And I think what a lot of us have learned is neither of those are particularly helpful words because they mean different things to different people. So one definition of primacy I'm entirely comfortable with, another definition I'm not comfortable with. Similarly, policy, which is one I've been pushing, has been put back to me, and Rick and I had a long discussion about this a few weeks ago, that actually policy means many different things to different people. And what we had to do was try to stop using both of those words and use alternative words which made it clear what we were actually talking about. So in terms of responsibilities, I mean, as Peter said, we are in agreement in both proposals with, and I'm going to quote the wording from the ORG here, that the directors need to take legal responsibility for the management and administration of the BMC on behalf of the members. And that is something that we tried to set up, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. I was part of the management committee, as was, and to be absolutely clear, a group of 30 people who met 5 times a year could not possibly manage the BMC. We were just not set up to do that. So we dissolved ourselves and we replaced ourselves with a national council. We passed significant responsibilities to the exec, the board, to work. The staff run the BMC day to day. The exec are there, the board are there to look after it week to week, month to month. And the National Council should be there to deal with the big decisions that come up over the course of time, including, in my terminology, policy decisions, but actually, let's step back from that. There's a lot of policies which actually are business policies, data protection, all sorts of things. Health, that is a very big one, and yeah. Well, let's come to that as a separate question, because that is one I think we do have to consider. But basically, there are a lot of business and financial policies that must sit with the directors because it is their responsibility to look after the business and look after the money. That's what we elect and appoint them to do. There are also policies that sit around ethics and ethos, which are the kind of things that I think that we want National Council to look after, the principles of the sport, the principles of what we do. This is one of the most emotive areas that we've seen a lot of change over the last 8 weeks. There was the original set of reserve matters that were put out by the ORG, which actually, if you look at them as the reason for existence of National Council, or Members' Assembly as they called it, so long as you clarified that the ethics policy sat with the mission, vision and organisational strategy, then you could be pretty comfortable with what the ORG put out. What then happened over the next couple of weeks is Sport England got hold of that and actually moved everything from approve into consult. And I think a lot of us have known various organisations where consult can just be lip service. So we were pretty unhappy at that point, and that's actually what got a lot of us moving for an alternative proposal. And then over a week or so leading up to the end of the area meetings, actually things started to move back again from consult back to approve. And actually that's one of the areas that we've put a lot of work in, is to try and make sure that we've got something that is a proper reason for existence of the National Council, to be the custodians of the values of the sport. And actually something that came out of a conversation between Andy and I last week was that this has precedence within other Tier 3 organisations. I think rugby, was it, you said? So rugby have a National Council, and rugby's National Council are the owners of the rules. Now, we don't call them rules, we call them ethics, we call them values, we call them whatever. But so long as we have, and this is where it's got us to one of our agreements now, is that we will use different terminology, but as far as Sport England are concerned, it's the rules. If those can sit with National Council, then all of a sudden that's a really big area that a number of us are suddenly a lot happier with.
Yeah, I think everything going to consult was not a good place for any of us. Emma and I worked pretty hard to try and again push it back for them to understand, and it's not, again, it's about their understanding of what it means and how it works, etc. So when we came with the rules, we had a number of conversations both with Emma, and I had numerous ones with Joy and Pete and Paul, trying to work out how we do it. What do we mean by ethos and ethics? you know, what's the difference between winter climbing and climbing with ice axes on rock when you're not allowed to, and you know, all that type of thing that's all within the ethos and ethics, whether you bolt a crag or don't bolt a crag. And Sport England don't really understand or care, but when you start explaining to them what we're talking about, and we talked about, you know, should it be an approved, should it be a consult, and actually what they came back with was put it in the objects. And the reason we stuck it into the objects was, if it's in the objects, we all understand it. If it goes into the reserved matters, because of the way it is, they're saying, if it goes into the reserved matters, we need to understand it, and we can't. And if we can't understand it, we can't tell how it affects what we're doing. So that's why we ended up putting it into a new object in, to get that clearly defined, that actually then you've got something to hold the directors to, you've got some clear point. Now, you can argue about whether they're upholding the values or whatever, and we can have great fun with AGMs arguing about values and whether we're upholding them or not, but it kind of, we all know what we're talking about there. Sport England can accept we know what we're talking about and turn Nelsonian eye to it, and that's why we've done it that way. And so what we've got now, and then we moved it up from consult into approve, the actual specifically putting that bit about traditional values, to try and get it to the point where actually people can see and understand that it is something that National Council are interested in and want to influence. It's effectively what we've called policy. It's bolting policy locally and things like that. It's just we've not called it policy. We've called it traditional values, ethos and ethics, because it's something that works in the code and allows us to move forward.
It also, and again for clarity, and I think this is a great opportunity here, just as in competitive sports, and bear in mind, you know, I say we don't refer to rules. Obviously, the competition side of the BMC does refer to rules, so I want to correct myself there. But rules change from time to time, and for us, the ethics will also change from time to time. Probably not at any great pace, but there are some real decent debates to be had over our ethics and ethos of mountaineering, and whether some of the long-held views actually, whether they still apply or whether they apply to all aspects of the sport. And I think where it encourages me that there can be a real tangible purpose for National Council and for the areas feeding into National Council is to actually take hold of those ethics and ethos. Dave's got a starting point of those things that ought to sit with National Council or sit with the directors, and actually National Council could carry out a review of those and consider whether some of those should be put out for discussion to the membership. And one I throw out there is one that is pretty emotive to people and has had a lot of discussion recently, is about promotion of the sport, encouraging more people to come into the sport, whether or not that is a good thing or not. Now, it's always been a long-held value of the BMC not to do that. We always encourage those who wish to take up mountaineering or have taken up mountaineering to join the BMC, but we don't encourage people to take up the sport for predominantly environmental and safety considerations. However, there's also an argument to say that indoor climbing does not face either the environmental or safety considerations, so perhaps we should revisit that and consider whether we exempt indoor climbing from that and permit promotion of that. It would be a very good debate for National Council to get its teeth into.
All right. I was just going to say, I mean, we've talked around about bringing it back to Pete's point, because I know, you know, the MOU is one of the things that we started this with. And the point to be made here is that one of the things that we've put into the new articles is the fact that there is a requirement to have an MOU between the board and the National Council, so that you can facilitate this whole conversation piece. And actually that has been added to the articles. That's one of the changes that was discussed and is being taken to the National Council tomorrow morning, very early.
I thought, you see, we were going to have a great ding-dong argument tonight led by these two people, and they're like Tweedledum and Tweedledee now.
It's taken us 7 weeks to get there.
Okay, that's what good negotiation and compromise is all about. I think, I mean, and perhaps there are people who still want to go on with the memorandum of understanding argument. I think we've exhausted it. With people, I think we've understood that there are different points of view, and I think we've understood those different points of view, so I want to move on from that, if I may. I do, however, want to press Andy on the nomination committee. I mean, one thing I'm particularly interested in, generally, is the way in which democratic and representative organisations work, not just what's in the Constitution, but the way they actually work in practice, because sometimes it's different. And I don't think we've had an explanation yet of what the thinking is as to how the nomination committee will work.
So the nomination committee is, as far as the article is concerned, is just a statement that there has to be a nomination committee. And we're not proposing to put more into the articles than that. The role of the nominations committee is effectively to hold on behalf of the board the skills matrix, to tell the board what are the skills that are missing, and then to go through the selection process on behalf of the board to take a candidate for the board to approve. The nominations committee do not, select, appoint and put them in. What they do is on behalf of the board, they say, these are the skills, or here's the skills matrix that we're managing for you, the board. And then we need somebody against the skills matrix. These are the skills we think you want. The board go, yeah, we're happy with that, or no, we're not happy with that, as they see fit. They then go out to the selection process, and then they come back and say, we had 4 candidates, and this is our recommendation as number 1 candidate, and here's the other ones, and why we've got the recommendation. The board go, yes, we agree, and we appoint them. So the nominations committee are really holding that whole skills and diversity matrix on behalf of the board, managing it for them in the same way that, say, the Finance and Audit Committee do the day-to-day on the finance and audit side of things.
It would be a transparent and open process that anybody could apply.
Yes, so one of the things... So the nominations committee, there are certain criteria around it that are driven by, again, good governance, etc. So you've got to be a majority have got to be independent directors is one of the drivers.
That is a Sport England requirement.
Yeah. Now you can, and then so what we need to do in developing the nominations committee terms of reference is look and say, well, okay, a majority of independents doesn't mean that isn't a majority of BMC members or anything else. The independents are currently, both of them are BMC members of long standing. There's no reason why they wouldn't be in the future. But I think we need to look at in that phase 2 and say, what do we need to add on top to make it right, make it fit with what we want? So you could, for example, and I think it was Cragg who came up with it, the idea of saying, get a completely independent, go to the Institute of Directors and say, we want you to sit there as an expert to make sure that the process is being followed properly. It's an expensive way of doing it, possibly, but that is a way. So we're not determining in articles how we do it. We will do it within the proposed phase 2. Sorry, the phase 2 part, and actually go through and work out what it looks like. At the moment, it is the chair, 2 independents, 1 national council, and the president, I believe. That's the current setup.
Yeah.
Nick.
Nick Kurth, Acting President, just to come back on that a little bit, it's not as if this is a new walk, new direction to go in. We have been running a nominations committee for the last 12 months. It's based on industry practice, there's nothing special about Sport England, etc. The model's being used around the country. We put the terms of reference in for 12 months, really to this AGM, with a view then to review the terms of reference and look at what worked and what didn't work, with a view then to melding it to the new board structure, the new national council structure, etc., in order then to develop it further. But it's not a new thing, it's a thing that we've actually had going. And the sole aim, as you've heard admirably from Andy, is to make sure then that we're getting the right skills, there's some objectivity and transparency in the process, which I would argue perhaps wasn't there before. Thank you.
You give choice
Okay.
to members. You get a number of candidates, that's the aim, isn't it? You
Yeah.
get
Okay.
more than one person who you can then take forward to your members and say, look, these people got skills.
Have we nobody else in the great outdoors who is... Oh, we have?
Yeah.
Yes, let's have a question from the great outdoors. I'll need the thing, don't I? Need to switch it on.
At no point has it been made clear, in simple words nationally, that membership would lose a lot of say if the BMC adopted the original set of proposals. Why? I take it that why refers to why it hasn't been made clear. A group then raise this and create the alternative proposals, and the BMC then start to move toward mid-ground. Why did we not start in the mid-ground? Asks Julian King. Well, I don't think it's for either of you, because I mean, you came in as part of the process, didn't you?
Yeah.
The acting president might like to comment. No? Does anybody want to comment? It's not for Dave to comment, I don't think. Okay.
Rick, we've got Rick.
Okay, Rick.
Hi, Rick Payne. I think it's slightly disingenuous, the question, because it predicates the fact that all options weren't considered. And I think it's important to recognise that the org actually started from some terms of reference which no one's questioning, and the org went through a very lengthy and democratic survey and debate focus groups with lots and lots of membership, and they came back with a set of proposals. And that was actually a set of proposals which was led by member feedback. And that's actually where we started from. Whether there's been now a shift, the shift has come from a set of proposal that came from member feedback. So there's a slight predication here that there was some sort of underhand suggestion that this is where we're going to sit and we've only moved because people have complained. Actually, that's not the case.
I think, I mean, as I said right at the very beginning, again, looking at it from outside, but being very interested, it was clear to me that the setting up the ORG, or org, or whatever you call it, came from both above and from below. And a lot of the pressure to do it came from people who were dissatisfied with the way the BMC was being run from a, well, you say no, it was fairly obvious to me that was the case. And there was a...
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, go on. Okay, go on.
The org, you're probably in reference to the motion of no confidence that happened in 2017. The whole process of the org happened before there was any motion of no confidence. In November 16, we had a discussion in the South East area about governance within the BMC. In 2015, as a member of National Council, I and other National Councillors were talking about the governance and the governance issues we had. The BMC recognised the governance issues and were moving on it long before there was ever a motion of no confidence. Now, what you're seeing is something that happened after we set things in motion, and because you didn't know we had already set things in motion, you're assuming it happened because of the motion of no confidence. I'm sorry, Mr. Greaves, that's completely wrong.
Well, there's no point discussing this. I mean, I would say that what you did in the South East was part of the grassroots pressure. Anyhow, it all happened anyway, and there were people with all sorts of different motives who thought it was a good idea to have an organisational review. There's no doubt about that.
Just in terms of the second point, I think the suggestion is that without the alternative proposal we wouldn't have moved or anything else. I guess I go back to what I said right at the very start, which is we always started with the position that we wanted it to be member-centric, etc. We went through a process with Sport England. We had to put the articles out in April to give people something to talk about, and it just happened it was at the positioning point from Sport England where they were going, right, we're setting our lines here and then we're going to negotiate from there. That's the way it was. We've moved to the middle ground. I would say the Tier 3 articles as recommended by National Council are pretty close to the middle ground, if not on it. We've moved a little bit closer together with some of the discussions here and some of the proposals that we've got that I think improves things, makes some things clearer to people, which is all good. But I don't think it's fair to say that the middle ground was only there because the Tier 1 articles. Actually, the first set of Sport England, you know, John and the ORG were screaming at me. If you thought Julian and Jonathan were annoying and loud, etc., it was nothing compared to what the ORG were doing from the other side. You know, it wasn't, there was always, the middle ground was where we were aiming for.
Can I just make a comment as a politician? some of you have started to behave like politicians in this meeting this evening, but never mind, that's all right. By saying, oh, no, it was us, no, it was not them, and oh, no, it was their fault. But it is the normal process of politics in any organisation, with a small p, that debate takes place, and compromise takes place, and negotiation takes place, and from my point of view, that is absolutely right. It's the right way to make decisions, because if you make decisions like that, you're more likely to get the right answer in the end. Far corner.
Thank you. It's Mike Pinder again. I'd like to take enormous exception to what you just said, I'm afraid.
Oh.
That I don't think it's appropriate for the chair of this meeting to make comments like that. And secondly, I would suggest that the middle ground, another term for the middle ground, is mediocrity. And that the hypocrisy of people in this meeting who have said that they want a member-led organisation, who have, in a small cabal, had conversations and changed what the National Council had approved as a proposal. They've gone in closed rooms, they've had conversations that have altered the proposals without giving the members a vote. As a member, I would like a clear-cut vote of voting for what the implementation group considers the best practice. And that, it appears, is being taken away from me, because we're now negotiating behind closed doors, small groups of people, friends who know each other, or acquaintances who know each other, are coming to some happy compromise. I don't want a happy compromise. I want the organisation that has my money to be run to the best possible practice.
So all the bits, the 5 changes we've talked about today are subject to National Council. They will actually be reviewed by National Council tomorrow morning and be voted on. So there is a risk that the National Council will say, no, we don't like them and we don't want to change the articles that we've recommended to fit in these changes. Having said that, I've talked to a number of National Council about them. I've tried to get some feedback from people to understand where there were things that they felt were fundamental to being the right thing and which bits were actually less so. So, for example, the Memorandum of Understanding, I think nobody sees that as in any way changing or weakening the articles as they were. So none of these changes, I believe, make governance worse. I think they improve it. I will put it to National Council tomorrow morning, and if they agree with us, then they will become the articles. If the National Council turn around and say, we don't agree that an MOU is improving our governance and is something better, then that will not make it into the articles, at which point it will be up to Jonathan whether he wants to then put it to the members as an amendment to add it into the articles anyway, or whether he wants to leave it. But it is going back to National Council, and as I say, I have talked to a number of National Council about these to try and gauge their understanding, and to others, and I believe that all the changes are an improvement on what we had, and they don't take away from the key good governance principles and the gold standard we wanted to get, Mike. And I think that's the point.
Nick.
I think it's been quite an interesting debate, and I do actually welcome both points of view. I think actually where I'm coming from particularly though is this discussion that's actually happened about actually picking up the good points from everyone's proposition and actually shaping it accordingly. And I think perhaps where I differ is actually having an alternative proposal with arguably bits of good practice in has been quite illuminating and actually quite a positive experience. And it's certainly questioned, I think, what's been put together in the first iteration of the articles. So I'm actually sort of half full rather than half empty about that. And I've actually welcomed the opportunity to have that debate. Whether actually that has been a dilution is, of course, a bit of a debate. I don't think it is. I think they're reaching this in an open, transparent way. As you heard from Andy, it'll go to the council tomorrow. They'll take a view on it. They'll see whether, in fact, it has or hasn't diluted what's happened, but I think I go back to my original point. I think actually this has been quite a good experience, because I think actually the product that we've got on the table now is better as a result of having that alternative set. Thank you.
I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I offended the gentleman in the far corner. I'd just give this advice to the BMC. The BMC is too important a body to fall apart. And what really was concerning me was that after the annual meeting in Kendal, unless there could be some compromise found and some means of accommodation, even if not perfect for people, then it could result in some people just walking out in anger. And I think that would be a very bad thing. It might still happen, but I think what has happened and the negotiations and the discussions and this meeting and everything else that's been going on makes that less likely. Surely the cause of the BMC is more important than people sticking to what they think are absolute principles, which will just cause damage and harm. Okay, I say that as an assertion, I'm sorry about that. Right, I've got a couple of issues which had been raised, and I'll raise haven't been raised by anybody here. One is the question of membership and the right of the board to accept or reject membership as opposed to a member-elected body. Is that an issue which has been resolved now?
This is considered by Sport England to be a primacy issue. We had, sorry, Emma's rolling her eyes about it. We must have had 5 or 6 attempts around this to say we didn't believe it was. Sport England believe it is. And it was one of the things that they said, no, that is how we have interpreted the code for everybody else. Your number, 56, between 56 and 58 in the queue, we've got a lot of precedents here. That's the way it is. There wasn't a debate to be had on that. So, I mean, that is a straight Sport England requirement. We have put into the reserved matters, we did get them to agree that I can't remember what the exact wording is, that any proposed changes to the categories and criteria of members, so i.e. what the rules that decide whether somebody's a member or not, or eligibility for the same, is an approved matter with the National Council. That's not a legal requirement on the organisation, that's a specific thing that we put in. What's the practical difference? Instead of Kate sending an email around to the National Council members saying, I've checked the criteria and this club is eligible to become a member of the BMC, she'll send an email around the directors saying, I've checked the criteria and this club's eligible to be a member of the BMC. It won't make any practical difference.
And I think from our perspective, this was one of the issues that we had on the list that we really didn't like, and we still don't like it, but as Andy says, it doesn't make a lot of practical difference. So in the spirit of trying to reach an agreement, we recognise we're not going to win every argument. We think we're probably at the point of an acceptable compromise.
Okay. I mean, it's quite clear to me that it's one of the instances in which Sport England and civil servants don't understand climbing, that you can't actually expel anybody from being a climber, whereas you can expel somebody from playing for a football club, or you can expel clubs. And you know, if you expel a club, then members of that club can still go climbing and nobody can do anything about it. Anyway, anything else? No, it's 9:30. Oh, 2 more, okay, there and there.
I've just got a concern about how we go forwards from here. Having spoken to 107 different climbers over the last 2 months and asking them to explain the process that's currently going on in the BMC, only 11 of them could actually state the org, and none of them could adequately explain exactly what the process we're going through is. With that in mind, we've got a huge number of our membership who are going to get ballot papers and we need to think very carefully about how an option is laid out before them, because in my mind, and I imagine quite a few people here would agree with me, unless we make the option relatively simple, it is just going to be confusing, and the opportunity to get 75% agreement is going to be practically non-existent. So I'd like ideas from the front, as in, how do we go forward? What options are we thinking of presenting to the membership?
Right, hang on. That's a going forward question. Is yours a going forward question?
Yeah, well,
and then we'll take
Is it going backwards?
Have you got something that comes before going forward? Go.
I think just revisiting Julian's question there's a great deal of frustration from some people, and I don't think it helps to just smooth it over and say that everything was done democratically. I think the organisation has to recognise, if the frustration is going to go away, that that's been the case. And I attended the National Council meeting in December as a stand-in for Andy Say, and it certainly wasn't the case that there was a unanimous feeling that the membership consultation via the questionnaires was democratic or unbiased. That was certainly not the case. There was a good minority at that meeting who felt that there were biased surveys. Again, other people who sought to engage with the organisational review, like James and Rodney, who attended other area meetings, there was actually a move at that National Council meeting to sanction them and their membership for attending area meetings outside of their area. So luckily it was voted down by a majority, but there was a good minority. So you've got to look at where this frustration has arisen. There are people who are frustrated, and we should recognise that if we're going to move forward together. And just coming back to the point about the Memorandum of Understanding, I recognise all of your points, Jonathan, and I was using the word policy in the loosest possible sense. And but as far as Peter, I trust you about your promise to come up with a memorandum of understanding. I trust you to do that, but articles of association in a multi-million-pound membership organisation shouldn't be based on trust. They should be quite clear about what they say at the outset when we vote on them. So we've got to make sure that it's super, super tight and people really understand what that says, because they don't know you, Pete. And that's what I wanted to say.
But it does specifically say about that there will be an MOU, or that in the amended one, it says, National Council and Board will agree a memorandum of understanding to ensure communications with both bodies are timely and appropriate to allow both bodies to understand the proposed actions and intent of each party. And the MOU can be reviewed at the request of either body and must be reviewed when the chair of either body is changed. That's the specific one that will go to National Council tomorrow morning.
Fully agree with you. We've tried to do what we can in the time to reach agreement in the time. So what Andy read out there are words that are proposed to go into the Tier 3 articles, and they commit to there being a memorandum of understanding, and that's the way it will operate. It's going to take a bit of time to develop that, and it is, because it is effectively a contract between National Council and the directors, that's something they actually have to agree. Pete's volunteered to take the points from the membership that the membership feels should be in there, and will attempt to put that into some kind of proposal to then go to National Council and the directors to thrash out between them. So I think at this stage, the fact that we've got that in there as a commitment to have one, we've then got a period of weeks and months in which to develop exactly what the detail of that is.
You should be able to have the draft by June. Obviously you can't put it in place because the board won't exist until after then if the articles are approved. So, but you could have it drafted up, ready to go. There's no reason why it can't be
pre-agreed by the exec and the board as something that they're all happy to, so it's actually ready and available so people can see it on, in June. And then if the articles go through, it's then signed up by both bodies as they are formed up under the new articles. That's fine. There's no problem with that.
Right, what happens now?
In terms of?
Well,
Moving on.
Moving on. In terms of, you're talking about the agenda for the AGM and that side of things, or in terms of what we're doing? What's going on the ballot paper? That's actually been Martin and Emma. Which one do you want to go?
Can I say what we would like to happen, and then our legal advisors can tell us whether we're allowed to do that or not. So. So we've spent a lot of time. We are very aware of the fact that the detail of this will be lost on the vast majority of members, and that actually, for most of them, they won't know what to do with it. There is a risk, a very real risk, that neither proposal gets 76%, and therefore all that results is a stalemate. And given that neither of us are proposing to stand still, actually a stalemate is worse than either of our proposals, because Tier 1 is a step forward to one position, Tier 3 is a bigger step to another position, and at the moment what we've been discussing is whether we want to make that level of step or not. But we all want to step somewhere with that. Nobody is proposing to stand still. So what we've been trying to do, and the reason that we have been working to a compromise, even though that appears to be a controversial thing to do, is to get to a point where there is a proposal that we could both be happy with that happens to be Tier 3 compliant. And if that is the case, and I believe that with what we've discussed today, and the biggest change, without doubt, the biggest change is what came out of the 28th of April National Council meeting. That was the biggest change. These are some additional tweaks to things. So the bulk is already agreed. With these, and the clarification on insurance to replace indemnity, my view is that we've got to a point that the differences between the Tier 1 perspective and the Tier 3 perspective are small enough that the positive to be gained of moving forward and of keeping the organisation as one entity, because without doubt, if we go to Tier 1, then there needs to be a separate arrangement made for Tier 3 applications for the funded partners, and that could, I don't think it will be, but it could be the start of a slippery slope, which would not be in anyone's interest. And if you look at the breakup of the UAA and the IFSC, that is generally not a model that we would wish to emulate. I think that has not been a happy working relationship. So anything that we can do to keep the BMC as one umbrella organisation, we should try to do, provided it is acceptable to all parties. I am now at the position that if National Council agree to this tomorrow, I will put a recommendation to the proposers of the Tier 1 motion that we withdraw it. Rod might disagree.
If I could add there to what Jonathan's saying, notwithstanding that good intention, there is a practical issue in respect to the resolutions which are on the table. The Tier 1 proposal is a resolution. It went in at the beginning of May. It's now fixed until we discuss it at the AGM. There will be a Tier 3 proposal which will also have to go to the AGM. I would suggest that there might be room, in theory, for a third proposal which represents some compromise, but the practical difficulty with that is that such a proposal needed to have been put in at the 1st of May. So practically speaking, it's not conceivable that at the AGM we can adopt the course of action that John is describing there. And I would suggest that there would be much merit in withdrawing both proposals, in taking at the AGM in June only routine business. We know we need to deal with the accounts, we know we need to deal with the elections, there are things we have to do statutorily. But what we don't really need to do, give or take a few weeks, is to try to fix this resolution problem, which the legal advice is unfixable. So in those circumstances, I would have thought better than a third proposal, which is practically and legally impossible, we can't withdraw proposal, Tier 1 proposal, and we can't withdraw the Tier 3 proposal. We're in a situation where if we don't decide to do none of them, we're going to have to do both of them.
So
the outcome that we've got.
Martin, Emma, you can correct me, but in terms of the proposal, assuming National Council sign up to these changes, there's nothing wrong with the BMC as an organisation putting out the proposals on the 28-day deadline. There's no requirement for the BMC as an organisation to submit 45 days before. Is that correct?
These are proposed by the board.
Yes, they're proposed by the board.
I'm sorry, the practical difficulty we've got is that the Tier 1 proposal is in. It was lodged at the beginning of May. It can't be withdrawn.
I'm not sure whether if
that's one legal opinion. Can we have two other legal opinions?
We'll get
and
three
then just
opinions.
keep working our way around till we get one we like.
Got to have the microphone or start with Emma.
Okay, the requirement under the articles where a meeting's been called by the executive committee, there's an ability for voting members, 25 signatories or more, to 45 clear days before the AGM to lodge a resolution, and that was done. The question as to whether it or not it can be withdrawn, I think the technical answer that would provide me with the most comfort is that with the agreement of all of the voting members who proposed it, then I can't see a risk of it being withdrawn. Because what would the risk be?
It can be.
Yes, if the people who proposed it.
Do all 44 have to agree to withdraw it, or do only...
If you're asking me for my absolute belt and braces advice, it would be all of them, because they'd all proposed it. What you're going to ask me next is what happens if so many withdraw it that you get beneath the 25 voting members threshold. I think technically there's a risk, I have to say that, of a challenge on process point, but I think the actual practicality of that is if your numbers have fallen to below 25, what does that send as a signal to your voting members of who's behind that proposal?
Right.
That's the practical point on the issue.
Emma, I hesitate to stop a lawyer ever in full flight. But we have a problem that the people who own the building and run the building want us to close down and leave as soon as possible because we've gone past our normal time. I apologise for that, which is my fault in a sense, but can I say that this legal point, or the legal points which are being discussed now, we are not going to resolve tonight. And whatever happens now, I think that I go back to, if I can bring the meeting to a close, I'm sorry about this, but I think we have to. When I was first asked to do this, it was suggested that at the end of the meeting I might like to make a contribution and bring everybody together in a nice way when they'd been throwing things at each other. Well, we haven't quite been at throwing at each other, and I don't think I have anything else to add, actually. I think that the contributions this evening, in all sorts of ways, and where we've finished, show the way forward. And I'm saying this kind of in a completely neutral way. I think that has happened, and I think we have Andy and Jonathan willing to go back and discuss these things with the National Council, and all we can do now is say, well, we've had this discussion this evening, we've tried to go forward in a way which will help the BMC, and we have now to leave it to them and the National Council initially, and the proposers of the motion, of the Tier 1 motion particularly, to see what can be done to put a satisfactory proposal to the annual meeting at Kendal. And if they find that that is not possible, it may well be that they have to find a way of deferring it in some way, but that is not, I think, the preferred option of most people in this room. So what I would say is just this. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you very much indeed for all your contributions. Thank you to the people in the great outdoors out there who sent in questions, and everybody else watching. Whether my daughter's still watching or not, I don't know, but I'll wave at her if she is. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to Crag, and thank you for Dave sitting here smiling enigmatically throughout the proceedings. And particularly thank you to Andy and Jonathan for leading the proceedings, and the experts who came as well. And thanks for the butties and the coffee. Thank you very much.
Can I just, before we all disappear, can I just thank you, all of you, for coming along tonight. You've all come a long way, I recognise that. It is appreciated. Can I also thank those that have been online, those who have engaged, it's much appreciated. And finally, if I may,